I'm going to do a simple snow scene. I was just going to do a pure tonal picture using just one colour, something like Cobalt Blue, but then I thought, well, let's just make it slightly more interesting. Use a limited palette and a couple of colours which are complementary to each other. In other words, on opposite sides of the colour wheel. So this is a simple snow scene with a gate and some fencing and some trees and so forth. I'm going to simplify that, and the colours I'm going to use Cobalt Blue, which was the colour I was going to use just for the tonal painting. But I'm going to add to that something like perhaps Indian Yellow, which is a lovely deep yellow colour, and then to complement those two, a bit of Burnt Umber. And I might just use a little touch of red in the Cobalt Blue in order to make it slightly warmer for some of the shadow blue colours that you see there. I'm just basing it on this picture. I'm not going to do the picture exactly as it is there in the photograph. Just one or two little things to mention here. What really attracted me to this picture was the fact that you've got this lovely light area in the centre. So your eye is drawn through to that light area, and it's that light area that we want to try and capture. And there's a nice yellow there too, which is very attractive. Having said that, the picture, although it's okay, would be better, I think, if the main focal point here, this gate, was to one side a little bit, so that the whole thing was just slightly off centre rather than being central like that. So I'm just going to start off with some simple pencil sketch. And I'm going to have my gate, as I say, to one side. Make the fence nice and rickety. In fact, in many respects, you don't need to do much drawing here at all. Some bars coming over the side. Slightly wonky fence post. And we've got these trees. There's no need to put those in detail because most of those will be drawn in using the paintbrush. But we've got this sort of arch effect with the trees on either side, leaving this gap in the middle which draws the eye in. Now the horizon line, normally we try and put a horizon line in which is not in the centre, but actually because we've got so much information down here, the horizon line I want it to be just slightly above, as in the photograph, slightly above the gate there, and in the distance we're going to have some distant trees, and then down here we'll have some ruts in the snow. So a very simple picture. Now, I don't like masking fluid very much, but I'm going to use a little bit here. I'm going to use it in two ways. I'm going to actually add it to the top of these struts where the snow is lying. I don't like masking fluid because I find it never goes where you want it. If you leave it on for too long, then it tends to lift the top surface off the paper, which I don't like. But I'm just going to put a little bit on some of these branch areas. I can see as I'm doing this, there's a diagonal on the gate that I've left off. I'll put that back on again in a minute. People often ask, how do you use masking fluid? I tend to make sure the brush is well and truly wet and wet it in between using it. That's fine. And then I'm actually going to use it to do a bit of splatter as well. So it's a slightly larger brush. That's definitely not going where I want it, doesn't matter. And that'll add a bit of texture and interest to the painting. The sky is going to be cobalt blue, so these little splatters will help just to break that up a little bit. I think that's enough of that. Now obviously we've got to let that dry before we go much further. So now that I've allowed the masking fluid to dry, I'm going to start the sky, and I'm going to help myself there by wetting it first. I should actually be using a bigger brush than this really. That just allows me a bit of time. So I'm not in any rush. I don't want the blue and the yellow to mix together. I'm going to have yellow lower down, where you've got this sort of loam, this distant clear sky, going up to cobalt at the top and getting darker as we go up. Put a little bit down here as well. But I don't want them to mix. If they do mix sometimes, well, very often, you'll end up with a green, which I don't particularly want. Okay, so let's just start off. Now I'm using Indian yellow here, but you could use Raw Sienna, yellow ochre, or just ordinary, very light cad yellow. So there we go. Just putting a little bit of red there, just give it a bit more interest. You don't have to do that. As I said, I was really wanting to confine the number of colours I use, but just putting a little bit of cad red just down there at the bottom. And continuing with the Indian yellow. It's fine. I'm going to put a little bit of that reflected down here too. Not too much, I want to keep it fairly white down here. And I want the field to be white behind the fence and the gate. And now I'm going to go in with some cobalt top. Could use a bigger brush. Now I'm making this into a little vignette, so I'm not going to go paint the whole use the whole page. I'm just doing a little vignette. Slightly darker towards the top, and all I'm doing here is using pure cobalt. I'm not using any other blue at all. That's fine. So I'm going to do some work on the far trees, and for that I'm going to use a very, very light green colour made up from the cobalt and the Indian yellow. That makes quite a bright green, much too bright. So I'm just going to dull that down with a little bit of the burnt umber. And the paper is just slightly damp still, which is good. So I'm just going to, there, that's quite nice, I like that. You can see as I put the colour on, it's slightly fusing with the wet paper, which is quite nice. Right down between the horizon and those trees, the foot of the trees, you always usually get just a slightly dark area. Good. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of work on the field behind, and for that I'm just going to use pure Cobalt Blue. Just little ruts. Some of these will disappear when the trees go in. You won't see them right in the horizon. They need to be dirtied up a little bit perhaps. Cobalt's nice bright blue. So just want to knock that back a little bit with a bit of burnt umber. It's important not to get rid of too much of the white. Now we can do a little bit of work on the gate itself and the fence. So I'm starting off with burnt umber. Nice and light to start off with. Not being too careful, just it's quite a rough picture. Darken it up slightly with a bit of cobalt. But still mainly the brown, just running again, nice and rough and ready. I'll come back and do a bit more of that later on, being very impressionistic really here. come back again to that a little later on. Time to put a few trees in, I think. Again, we start off with our burnt umber, just a little touch of cobalt, just to too blue there, I think. And you carry on doing that ad infinitum. So we're a bit further on. You can see that I've got a bit more of my thicket in. It's important for this sort of work to use a brush with a nice fine point and to work away from the trunk towards the sky. Now I'm going to just bring the gate a little bit further forward. Just by using the gate and the fence I'm talking about here. So just using, again, just a bit darker. And I'm going to just plant the trees in the ground a little bit more by adding one or two little dark marks, little scrubby marks here, using positive and negative painting. And making sure that all my shapes are connected together. Now I'm going to put a little bit of twigginess in the tops here, and using burnt umber, dull it down again with a little bit of blue, too much perhaps. And where you've got lots of fine twigs at the top, using the side of the brush you can just scuff down like that. Brush wants to be sort of laced with a weak, low tone, dirty green for this sort of thing. and I might just use some of that low down here as well. Again, just to connect shapes together. Right, I think we're at the stage now where we can think about doing some on the foreground. And it's important with the sort of snowy scene here to keep these shadows quite simple. So again, it's mainly Cobalt Blue. Because they're closer to the eye, then maybe just add a little touch of a red, something like alizarin crimson is fine for that, but don't make it too warm. And as it gets closer to the eye, these little ruts and so forth, a little bit more pure cobalt, a little bit darker, slightly higher tone. Shadow work underneath there. And that's us getting very close to being finished. I'll let that dry and then take the masking fluid off and see what we've got. The masking fluid has been taken off and you can see it's worked in some places, not in others. That's perfectly okay. I can sort that out. We've got great big gaps here where I didn't get a fine enough line. I don't want to lose all all that we've gained there, so just a case of putting in enough around it to make the white show up. As I've always said before, if you want a light to show up, you put a dark beside it. So that's essentially what I'm doing at the moment. Now I could use something like white gouache as well, which I might well do a little bit of in a minute, just to add a little bit more white where I want it. And a little bit of shadow work. Just a hint. So just putting the darker marks in, bring the eye a little bit closer. Careful when you mix the burnt umber with cobalt. You can end up with a very dull grey. If you don't want it to happen, put a little bit more of the burnt umber in than the cobalt. Burnt umber has a lot of red in it, and therefore it tends to keep the colour mix a little bit warmer, which is nice. I mean, I'm just playing here. I could have stopped a long time ago. We've got white on top of that horizontal wooden piece there, so we'll just emphasise that. And where the snow has disappeared on top of those rails, it's because the cobalt blue behind them is not quite dark enough in tone, so just add a little bit there to that, and that'll help the snow to show a bit more. So that's what I say, if you want a light to show up, then put a dark beside it. I think that's finished. Very, very quick and simple little vignette using 2 or 3 colours. Colours opposing each other on the colour wheel, which always works well. So we've got our cobalt blue, we've got a yellow. I've used Indian yellow as I said. You can mix those two together, you can get a whole range of different sort of greens and so forth. And because you've made your greens up from the colours you've already used for things like the sky and so forth, then everything sings to each other, everything connects. The painting becomes homogeneous in the way that it works, rather than using a green from a tube. It's always a good idea to mix your greens up from the colours you've already used. Making sure that the areas to the front are warmer, so that your eye gets taken in. The colours and tones that you use towards the rear of the painting are duller, colder and weaker. The yellow there always works to help take the eye through and in, and done very, very quickly, very, very crudely, not particularly accurately at all, but just to give an impression of the sort of snowy scene. I've seen people do these things as cards for Christmas and so forth, where they've done card after card after card, and they get it down to a fine art where they're doing each painting maybe in a total of about 10 or 15 minutes, with slight variations between them, and it's a good thing to do, a good practice as well. Anyway, I certainly enjoyed doing that. Certainly something much less complicated than I normally do, and I hope you enjoyed watching that and got a few hints for your own painting too. Anyway, thank you for watching.